Hi guys, how are you? Tonight I'm here with one of the most important artists who worked with Flash. He's a writer, penciler, inker, colorist, and a really nice guy. So I'm here with the great Scott Collins. How are you, Mr. Collins?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Mr. Collins, my first question is always the same. Who are you?
Who am I? I am a comic book creator. I mostly pencil comic books. Sometimes I write, sometimes I color. Um, I've done just a smidge of lettering. And I've done other stuff too. I've worked a little bit on storyboards, coloring books, but it's usually related somehow, still usually to comic books. And I've done a little bit of toy design as well, but again, just related to comic book stuff.
Okay, perfect. And okay, I want to start from the start. Okay, so you were born in Seville, as we say before, and my first question is it's not my first, it's my second question, but it's pretty simple. How did you end up making comics for US? You know?
Well, I am a US citizen. I was actually raised in the US and both my parents are US citizens.
Oh,
The Seville-Spain connection is just because my dad was in the Vietnam War at that time.
yeah.
So he was stationed in a couple different places. He was only briefly in Vietnam itself. He was in the Air Force. But I was born in Seville on an Air Force base while he was stationed.
Oh,
My brother, in fact, was born in the Philippines in the same kind of situations because that's where my dad and my mom were stationed at that time while he was serving his time in the Air Force. So besides, to the age of 2, I've spent almost no time in Spain. I did get to go just a few years ago to a convention in Spain. But that's the most touring I've ever done in Spain.
okay. No,
But I
that's
enjoyed it. I love it immensely.
I will change the question. Okay, so how did you start? How did you wish to make comics? You know?
How did I start in comic books? Okay. Started reading comic books when I was 5 or 6.
Okay.
As soon as I was reading them and I found them, I started drawing right away. And because I didn't realize like the worlds that had been developed for DC or Marvel or whoever else was out there at the time, besides like the little kid stuff like Richie Rich or Casper the Ghost or something like that, I was always reading the superhero stuff or something related to it like monsters. So I would immediately start drawing on my own. And I thought, well, this is what you do if he's got Spider-Man and they've got, Superman over here or whatever. Well, I'm going to make up my own characters and I'm going to use, whatever powers and things I think I ever want to use and try and do stuff. So I've always been doing that. Then when I was about 12 or so, I had a paper route.
Okay.
And one of the college students on my paper route, actually, when I went to chat with him one time about getting his payment for the paper, somehow I must have seen something in his apartment that showed comic books, or he asked me, I don't know. Anyway, we then bonded over the fact that we both love comic books. And he showed me that he had a bunch of Thors and a bunch of other stuff at that time. And then I started explaining that I drew and that I wanted to draw comic books or some of my lines. So then he introduced me to, there was a professional comic book inker at that time living in my town. His name was Dennis Jensen. So through this friend off of my paper route, he knew Dennis and sent an invitation or something. So I went over to Dennis's house. As weird luck would have it, he was an inker on the Flash.
Okay.
He was inking the Flash at that time. This was around the early 1980s. And he was inking over Carmine Infantino, that last run of Carmine Infantino on the Flash time. I think it was before the trial of the Flash or whatever. I don't remember all that stuff. But anyway, met with Dennis, a bunch of other kids also lived in town, found out about him. We were all swarming his house all the time. So we made a club of it where we started to go over actually the basics of like how he broke in the industry, how you put together a page, how you work on your drawing skills, all those sort of things. So that by the end of high school, when I started college, and started college in my hometown, the art program really wasn't geared toward making comic books. They did not know anything about that stuff. So it took me a couple of years to actually just get up the courage to send my portfolio to the Joe Kubert School, which I did, and a roommate of mine did at the same time, and we both went off to the Gilbert School, which was great. It was a great school, really helped me learn. I had some really great teachers. Amongst them were Kim DeMolder, who was an inker at Marvel at the time. And then during my second year of school, I had Bart Sears, who was a huge up-and-coming penciler at that time.
Yeah.
He was doing Justice League Europe at that time. Anyway, had great classes, great teachers. And then after my second year of school at the Kubert School that summer, a bunch of my friends were getting hired, a bunch of friends that were at the Kubert School. They got hired at Valiant, which had just been starting to be made then in the early 90s, where they were just starting out with Magnus, Robot Fighter, and Solar, Man of the Atom, and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, they were just starting, and they wanted a bunch of I think cheap kid talent to come in and hire them and then get them to make the comic books they wanted to make. A lot of my friends were inkers or colorists, or they became writers and different stuff. I was actually hired by them as one of their next pencilers. They had David Lapham at the time, who I think he hadn't drawn Magnus. I know he started Rye. Anyway, I was one of the next pencilers that was hired there, and I was there for the creation of Exo Manowar. I helped in his creation. I helped with design aspects of his armor and stuff like that. But that was actually supposed to be my first book. But once that was kind of all set, we did a test story where I make sure that I could draw stories the way that Jim Shooter wanted them drawn. And I don't know if you've heard, but Jim's actually very, very particular about how he wants them drawn. So I did the little meeting with Jim Shooter, and he told me, he explained his Captain America story that he shows apparently everybody. And he told me how and why to do this panel, not to do that panel, all these different rules, most of which I kind of agreed with. So I tried my darndest, but actually it didn't work. I did the little test story with them. And I don't know, a few weeks before probably I was supposed to finish that story and then start on Exo. It was Jim Shooter and it was Bob Layton that were mostly in charge that I dealt with at the Valiant Comic Books. And about 30 days in or so of my working there, doing some also, it was a really great time, but they let me go. Yeah, they let me go. They canned me after 30 days, but they were really nice about it in that same context, as mad as I could be about what was happening. And I really did not want to leave. I was very excited about what we were doing. Jim got me an interview at DC Comic Books, where I got my first actual paid published job, which was for Impact Comics, which was a portion of DC Comics at the time, where they were doing a bunch of Archie superheroes, the Jaguar, the Shield, the Fly, a bunch of those guys. I did a Jaguar annual for the DC editor, and then at the same time, that was Jim's referral, and then Bob Layton got me a referral at Marvel, where I met with John Romita Sr., because they still had the art corrections unit at Marvel Comics at that time, and they were called Romita's Raiders, where they would fix somebody's boot, or if somebody had drawn the balloon in the wrong spot, we'd move it over or do what we had to do. Corrections to the board or corrections on a piece of, I forget what they called it. It was a piece of paper that had a little sticky to it that we could put over the page. Anyway, I got a Jaguar job and I did that one. And then for the Marvel thing at the same time, or around the same time, I got the job I did the interview with John Romita Sr. And he said, yeah, sure, you're hired. You can do this job, which was also then perfect, because that meant I got paid a little bit as almost like an intern, but I got paid a little bit, and I got to go to the Marvel offices every day. And I did that for about 5 months, I think. All the while doing that day job, I would get more samples and whatnot together so that I could go to each of the offices and visit the editors and make the connections, which I did. And that started me down the path of all the rest that came.
Wow, that's really nice. I really like when the artists that I interview tell the whole history. You know, I'm here, and that's really nice. I really like to hear it, because every history of every artist is different, right? So it's so nice. So and it's interesting to know who were your main influences when you started to draw? Who were the artists that you look at and you said, okay, I want to be this guy?
Right. When I was little, well, I should do it in chronological form. When I first bought comic books, my first comic book that I bought off the shelf was The Hulk. And Herb Trimpe was drawing it at the time. So even though he didn't last as well, I guess, throughout the ages or whatnot, and sadly we lost him a few years ago. I thought he was a tremendous artist, and I always credit him because he's the one who totally sold me on comic books. I bought those Hulks, and I was immediately a Hulk fan, and immediately a comic book fan in general. Once I found other books, you know, I got excited about other artists, but Herb was my guy for a long time, where I just thought he did such a fantastic job with the Hulk and other stuff at that time. So then, but I will say also at that time, being as young as I was, I didn't know Herb's name. I didn't realize, I didn't pay attention to the credit box to know it was Herb. I put that together later. The first artist that caught my eye, that I saw him on 2 different books, that I really liked this one. Oh, that one looks really cool. Wait, this one looks really cool too. They kind of look the same. Who's the, and then I started looking at the credit box going, oh, right. And the first guy that caught my eye like that was John Byrne. He was doing Iron Fist, and he was also starting on X-Men. I saw probably saw some of the issues out of date or out of sequence, but I recognized some similarities between the 2 books, and I pieced it together. John Byrne was a huge influence of mine for a long time. Up through high school, even until the time I got to the Kubert School, I would say he was still a pretty strong influence. And some of what he has and what he did on all those works is just, I think it's part of my DNA now. I don't think I could get rid of it if I want to. I think I still tell stories and some of those things in a similar fashion to how he does it. I'm sure there's some hands or different things that I draw that are going to come out like John Byrne hands once in a while, whether I try or not. But besides John, the other big one during that whole like grade school, high school, all that time would have been George Perez. His time on the Titans and on Avengers and all that during that time was absolutely crucial to my development as an artist, and for just the love of the material. He had such compassion and emotion, and beyond the crazy fantasy of those superhero stories, they all seemed like real people in George's stories. So I was hugely crushed when he passed away recently. That was very disturbing for me. But after high school time and getting into the Kubert School time, then I was finding out a lot more about the fantastic ends of the spectrum of stuff. I consider George and John Byrne to be more the center of the mainstream of what was going on. By the time I got to the Kubert School, I was a big Jack Kirby nut, so I was getting more into the history of comic books, and liking other guys too, Gil Kane's and Carmen Infantino's and Alex Toth and all that sort of thing too. But the other end of my artistic spectrum on all that would have been, and a big influence was Barry Windsor Smith. It was around that time that a roommate started showing me all of his old Conans and all that stuff. And that was also around the time when he was doing more X-Men's. And then while I was at the Kubert School was actually when he was coming out with Weapon X, and my mind was just blowing every other month when you'd see those new pages coming in, what was going on with Weapon X. It was incredible.
That's perfect. And I was seeing this drawing of the Avengers behind you, and you told that Paris was a huge inspiration to you, and I can see the details, you know, when we read the Crisis on Infinity Earths, we can see all that characters, and I can see all the details, you know. I really can see the George Paris influence on your art, and this is very nice.
It is one of those things that has hung around me. When there was still this magazine about comic books that was around called Wizard Magazine. They were around the time that I was working on Flash. And they started asking me for jobs or hired me for jobs to do. And every time, I swear, I felt like every one of those jobs was a job that George said no to or was too busy to do. And then they got me to do it, because quite often it was like, can you draw these 50 guys on this one picture? Yeah, I can.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it's an idol that I can't do this. So okay, let's give to Scott. So that's nice. That's nice. So and you told that at the start when you started to read comics, you can't differ. You know, you didn't see the difference of an artist and other, and obviously to me, I couldn't too. For example, when I started, I was 9 years old, and I saw something like, I don't know, Art Baltazar, and I saw Alex Ross, and I thought, my God, this guy is very fickle, you know. He he does everything. So every comic book, it was just one guy. I thought like this. I was a little
Yeah.
bit ingenious. I don't know. That's okay. So okay, let's back to your career, because as I said, and you say too, you're an creator because you make everything. You write, you wrote on your career, you're an penciler, an inker, colorist. So okay, this question, I think I know the answer, but it's interesting to see your perspective.
Mhm.
uh what of those you most like to do, you know?
Which job?
Pencil, ink,
Right.
uh everything.
Um, I'm probably the best at, so I also kind of mostly enjoy that penciling job that I do. But for a long time now, since actually the Flash, um, either my pencils, the finished pencils I had, were basically inked, or these days, like on King Shark, I actually changed tools a little bit, and I tried to go back to a little bit of a traditional ink job with the pit markers that I was using. Um, so it's always been a little bit combination of that. In fact, when I broke in right before the Valiant thing, I actually had samples of nearly all of it. I had samples as a colorist. I tried to get a coloring gig at DC Comic Books. I had various samples of inking. So there were a couple times I think I was trying to get an inking job doing something. Um, and then I had my penciling samples as well. So it's been all of that kind of stuff. And that actually mixed in with the writing. I should also credit all of those influences that I mentioned, except
Yeah,
Herb, I guess. But John Byrne, George Perez, Jack Kirby, Barry
yeah,
Windsor Smith, all these guys that I'm listing, and there's tons more, Frank Miller and all that stuff too, Mike Mignola. All of those guys at one time or another wrote and drew their own books,
yeah.
either for the mainstream or for the stuff around them. So that was also something that I was used to as a kid when I was reading my books, since I was just a big John Byrne fan. I became his fan during X-Men time, but then I followed him through Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight and Avengers and all these other things he had done, Hulk, and Superman, all the DC stuff too. So that I was used to the thought of there would be this creator who could probably do at least most of those jobs. He might not color the issue or something like that, but he would at least write and draw it. George did that, Barry Windsor Smith, like I said, all of these guys. So that was like, that was always part of the goal for me. Not only, like I said, when I was a kid and I was first drawing stuff, that I would make up my own characters. I always had books and books and scrapbooks of my own characters all throughout high school and college. In fact, one of the books I had done, Adam,
Nice.
he was very different at the time, but I had him since high school. He was a character I had around since then.
Nice, nice.
So it's just always been something I've wanted to do. But if you have to narrow me down to one job, it'd probably be the penciling. That's the one where it's the least amount of stress and can be the most amount of fun.
Okay, that's perfect. I imagine, because the most part of what you did on your career is it's pencil, right? So I imagine, but that's really nice, because I have your perspective. Why you really like to pencil? It's really nice. So okay, I will now to the questions about Flash. So my first question about Flash is: aren't you tired of questions about Flash?
No,
Okay, so okay, this
I mean,
okay,
to give a longer answer there, there were times when I was, when I was doing my Marvel or stuff or something else was going on, and I'd have, I'd go to conventions and people would want to talk about Flash or have me draw the Flash the whole time. And I'll admit that there were times I was like, can we, do we do something else? But I've come around on all of that now. Now I just realize that there's a piece of my whole career that's very lucky to have that Flash as part of it. There are friends I know who have been part of the business that aren't necessarily lucky enough to have that lightning strike of having a book that they're that strongly connected to. I mean, I have my friend Jeff Johnson, who's really connected to Wonder Man, and he's done some other books, but there's other guys I know throughout their career that were really great, but then they never had that, one book or the couple books or whatever that really helped strengthen their career, so that even if other things weren't going so great, you knew that this was always something that was going to back you up, even if other things may not have been going good, or some other books may not have been selling as well. I can still go to conventions, I can still talk to people, this and that. And sure, half the time it's going to be about Flash, and that's okay. Plus, at different times, I've enjoyed the fact that even though I guess ultimately, yes, I had the best time working on Flash with Jeff Johns, I've enjoyed working on Flash with some other guys, with Joshua Williamson, and I just did a Flash one-shot little story that's only going to be with Todd McFarlane Toys is doing a set of DC stuff and one set of his Flash. So there's a Flash, I think a Gorilla Grodd, and a Captain Cold, and I think even a Heatwave figure. But DC hired me with McFarlane's approval to draw a Flash comic book. So I still got to do it. And it's now, this was with Tim Seeley as a writer. But it's fun to always revisit that and not only see if I can keep doing as good as I did before, but see if I can still come up with different twists and things. Because that was one of the great things about my time on the Flash with Jeff, was that ultimately it was still very experimental for me during the whole run that I've had on that, even the more recent stuff. But definitely during the time I was up with Jeff, because up and until I'd worked with Jeff on Flash, we'd worked together on Stars and Stripe, and I had been working in industry for a few years at that point, doing a bunch of different things. I had a run on Legion of Superheroes already, and a bunch of work at DC and Marvel. But all of that work was very much still in that line of thinking of George Perez or John Byrne or Alan Davis or Michael Golden or any of these other greats. So it still had a lot of shadows to the work, had a lot of feathering lines, like it was going to be brush inked, all those kind of things. And I was still looking for like the inking pair person that I would buddy with, like John Byrne and Terry Austin, or Alan Davis and Mark Farmer, all that kind of thing, right? Or Frank Miller and Klaus Janson or something. I never did quite find necessarily that inker, but on Flash, I did have Doug Hazelwood, and he was probably ultimately in the history of inkers that I've had. He's one of the best that I had, because he handled the faces exactly pretty much how I wanted them handled, which is really particular. We can get really fussy about that. And then also he just had the guts and the wherewithal to follow through with all the detail that I was drawing. All of the machinery, all the landscapes and the city backgrounds that I would draw, that all that crazy stuff. He inked all of it, and he never complained once. We'd chat every month or so or something like that, and he'd tell me he got tired and he'd have to take a break off of one page and do an easier page or something. But he did the work, man, and he did it really well. So one of the reasons I like the Flash is because I've been able to constantly challenge myself to what's a different way to draw the speed. What are the ways that I've used so far? How can I manipulate that one so that it's different? And there are even times on Flash later, like on Citizen Cold and other stuff, where I got to draw the tonal.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Now
That's
this
beautiful.
is one for a Flashpoint Beyond, I think is the book. This will be out in like the next month or something like that. But when I did that whole Citizen Cold thing, it was like this. So it was, that's pencil, that's just smudging pencil around.
Nice. This is the original art.
This is the original page.
Oh my God.
This is the original page that'll get published. And it says on top, the Flashpoint Beyond, the variant cover. Yeah. So I've been able to do that as well, even though for most of the Flash run, it was without any sort of shadows at all. When I came back to it and I had to do Citizen Cold, in which, again, I was lucky enough that I got to write and draw that series for DC. I was still able to turn it around because it was Citizen Cold, it was Captain Cold, whatnot. And it didn't have to have the speed stuff of the Flash. Then I thought, hey, let's try this other style that I tried a couple times before on a Mega Flight and some other books, where it was really labor intensive with all the shadows and the shading and the subtleties and that kind of stuff. But that's part of the fun of it for me in that penciling phase of it, is what can I bring to this that's going to make it look a little bit different. I don't know if I have, I don't have a Grundy book here, but Grundy was another one that I specifically did different style on.
Okay.
So that it had a lot of shadows,
Yeah.
and had all that gritty work with his the vines growing and to make him look like a zombie and all that kind of stuff. Lots of shadows and black spaces and his cloth that he wore and all those things. So it was me trying to tailor it to each story. That's one of the reasons why I think it worked for the Flash, was I tried the different style that had no shadows to it, and it worked really well for Flash.
Yeah, that's perfect. Wow. Okay. I had a question about it, about this part of your life, this, I don't know, this, you know, when the people know you about only one thing, but you already answered me. So it's not necessarily about one thing, but okay. I forgot what I was saying. I'm crazy. Okay. So, okay. Recently, I don't know if you know, recently in Brazil was published an huge omnibus about your Flash run. You know, it's giant, and I almost bought it, but there was only one problem. It was more expensive than another omnibus that I bought, that is She-Hulk by John Byrne. So okay, don't be offended, but I you know, I didn't bought.
Oh yeah, I'm not offended at all.
But I bought the John Byrne. That is one of your inspirations. So it's almost the same thing. So that's okay. But I will buy. I really like it. You know, when they announced that they would publish it, this omnibus, I was so happy, you know, so that's really nice. So okay, the next question is about Flash, and I'd like to talk about your drawing on Flash, because okay, I was thinking about what question can I do about Flash that he never heard before. I don't know if you never heard before it, but it's a question that it came from my heart, you know, because it's very it's an and thing that makes me curious. So okay, I like so much your Flash, and when you draw him, you draw different of some artists who does it, you know. I mean, when you draw him running, it really looks like he has a move there, you know. I don't know how to say, but okay, how you thought in make this movimentation to Flash when he's running? I feel like he's already one step forward where he really is, you know. I don't know if you understand, but
Okay.
I think it's beautiful, and that's my question.
How do I draw the speed? How do I think about it? Is that what you're asking me?
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Are you asking me how I draw the speed, how I go about it, how I think about it?
Exactly.
All right. Well, again, I think it was one of those things that helped make me unique a little bit, in that I took out all that shadow work.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you're putting in shadows or any of that kind of stuff with the various artists that have tried it before, not only are you putting in the shadows, but that's not going to happen either. Wish I had a classic piece around me. Not only would you have the shadow going on, but you'd also, with the inking of it, you'd have little lines.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It would be off of there. The lines, the block of shadow, all of those things, and all of those being musculature that's pointing in different directions. All of that stuff, to me, ultimately, when you're drawing the Flash, some people are very good at it and they can still make it work. But for me, I think that helped me, that I eliminated all of that stuff and I just put it down so that there's a simple line here that would be for here or for the shoulder or whatever it was. Just a symbol, 1-2 dash lines, not a whole lot of lines going on.
Yeah.
That simplified his space and what he was doing. To me, it was like when you'd be drawing Silver Surfer in the same way we would be drawing the chrome of the Silver Surfer. That alone helps him look otherworldly and spacey and even fast to some extent, because there's no feathering or whatnot to slow it down. I mean, even here where I've drawn on a blank comic book,
Yeah.
I put in some shadows in here, but there's really not feathering. There's still just shapes of stuff. So then it's a matter of eliminating half that stuff, but then also a friend of mine asked me about all the lightning and stuff that I've drawn recently.
Yeah.
Like here, I even put it on the back of the comic book.
Nice.
But there's a method to my madness about this lightning, so that a lot of times the shapes and the fluidity of the lightning that's in the foreground recedes and gets tinier in the background.
Yeah.
There's a really good shot of
Yeah.
how
That-
it looks
that's-
like really close here and then really far away there.
Yeah.
And then it's also just a matter of, for him and running, actually, it's one of those things where I turned into, it was very easy, ultimately for me. I did a tryout issue of The Flash that was before the Jeff Johns run. It was issue 160. Sometimes they put it in the trades. It was the honeymoon issue of Wally and Linda. And in that one, I drew more of the regular shadows, the regular line work, but the running poses themselves came very easy to me. Actually easier a lot of times than flying poses and some other things, or I don't know, Spider-Man swinging poses, maybe even. For some reason, the running poses worked really well. And I've talked to other artists, or other artists have talked to me about it since then, and they've complimented me. Is one of my strengths as a comic book guy, is that my characters are generally very fluid. I always have a lot of motion to them. I often am the kind of guy who will sacrifice the detail or the reality of an anatomy of whatever is going on for the sake of the movement, for the sake of going on. I won't worry about, the deltoid or the latissimus or what is muscles being exactly right and perfect. Because every time I saw people doing that, when I was at school, or when I was in studios of other artists, and we were all working together. And I even saw it sometimes of myself when I would work on a drawing. I'd work on it one way, then I'd flip it over, and I'd work on the drawing again, and I'd flip it over, and I'd work on it again. And you can do that, and I have done that. But for most people, when they keep doing that over and over and over again, the drawing gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and you lose that fluidity, you lose that motion, you lose that speed. So there was the 3D effect, and then there was also just that kind of fluid motion of, even when the figure's doing something, there has to be the movement of what's going on with it. Since we're just doing a little piece of paper here that doesn't do anything, it doesn't make any noises, doesn't do anything else. If I can't sell this, if I can't show that he's actually punching at that moment, then to me, that's one of the key factors of making a good comic book artist. There's tons of guys out right now who do tremendous jobs of the realism and the lighting and all these great city backgrounds, all these kind of things. But more often than not, I'm seeing their figure work impeded by all that photo reference that they're using. That's making their anatomy and their costumes perfect and exact. But a lot of times you miss this going on with the character. And that has to be implied with all this stuff. Otherwise, it just kind of looks like stock photos of stuff. And it's like the difference of, in your mind, going to a basketball game or going to a soccer game and knowing that movement and feeling that movement of the player doing that stuff. Versus if you just see a magazine of soccer or a magazine shots of basketball, if you pay attention to the magazine, the actual photograph, it's going to look pretty stock still. It's going to look very stiff. So it's part of the magic to me of, you have to do this for comic books. So I guess it is so important to me. That's one of the reasons why it worked out so well for The Flash.
That's nice. Oh my God. In this moment, I started to love your art more, because it's okay. I'm not trying to, I don't know how I can speak this word in English, but I'm not saying good things to, okay, now he will like me. It's not this. I really appreciate it, and at the moment, the only thing I wish on my life, it's one sketch, and I really wish that you come to Brazil soon.
I hope I do. Well, I think what's coming across, why you're being affected that way, is because I love this stuff. I am passionate about doing this stuff and doing it as best I can, and telling these stories the best that I can. In the same fashion, I feel like I have inherited that. because of my love for John Byrne or George Perez, all these different things. That's how generally they talked about it, that I heard in their interviews. And that infected me as a creator when I came along and wanted to work on it. In fact, since we mentioned George before, and he was one of my influences, I met George a couple times at conventions and stuff like that. Very briefly every time. I never really got to talk with him too much, but when I was in that club in high school and we were putting together our little portfolios and I was learning from that flash inker, a couple of us put together a book, like, I don't know, a short story, like 7 or 9 pages or something like that, of our own characters, our own thing, whatever. But we just came up with this silly little story, whatever we did. It was actually ourselves turning into superheroes and stuff like that. It was really bad, but we brought it. One of the guys went with me. We went to a convention in Chicago, which was our nearest convention at that time.
Nice.
And George was there. He was one of the artists we saw in one of the side rooms. So we took our comic book and we had little printout things, so it looked like it was a little comic book on paper, whatever. And we brought it up to George and we said, "Here's our book, George. What do you think? Aren't we great?" Or, you know, something like that. And he spent, I don't know, at least a half an hour with us. It seemed like a long, long time. He went over every page. He went over every panel. He went over everything from A to Z of what we had done and ripped us apart. He told us how bad it was. He told us how terrible we had done and that this perspective was wrong and this was wrong and that list from everything we had done. But, and I just told this to another professional lately who had known George, I said, but honest to God, I walked away, my friend and I, we walked away from George like our minds were just blown and we were stunned and everything. And okay, we weren't great, we weren't good. In fact, we were terrible. But George did it in such a compassionate way, in a positive way of telling us we were really, really bad, that we walked away from his meeting with him knowing that we were going to just throw that comic book in the trash. But we were jazzed to go back to the hotel room and start again and do another one and do another one and keep doing it until we got it right. It's that passion for this stuff. That's where I have the other YouTube thing that I do with the guys called On Another Round. They were in a studio with me with Jeff Johnson and Steve Jones. And that's mostly the reason that we have this other show that we do, that we put on YouTube, is just for the three of us to get together because we're all living in different states now. But through a similar meeting like the Zoom stuff, we use StreamYard, but this gives us a time where the three of us can talk again about comic books. We did one last night just about villains. And all we did was we just started naming villains where I was drawing, where do you go? He's right here somewhere. Here he is.
Nice.
I was drawing Grodd while we were talking.
Yeah.
But then we just talked about every sort of villain that was going on. We mentioned Marvel villains, DC villains. We started getting off on tangents of which ones we liked or we didn't like. It's just fun. It's always the thing for me that I've always really enjoyed this stuff. So hopefully, if for nothing else, beyond whatever I actually did on the page or the books that you read of mine or that kind of thing, I'm hoping that's what really comes across. It's just that I really do I live and breathe this material. I love doing this job.
Yeah.
I am so lucky to have this job.
This is very nice. I have a comic book maker, a comic book creator friend, Daniel HDR. I don't know if you know him. But
I met Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah, he's from Brazil, right? So we made a podcast about George Paris when he passed away, and Daniel met George Paris, and George told him that when you do what you do with love, the people can see the love in your pages. So that's really nice. This is totally what George did, you know. That is really nice. And I had another question that I forgot. Always I'm forgetting. I don't know why. That's okay. Probably I will remember soon. But okay. Oh, okay. Just remind. When you told that you take the scripts and you make these pages with love, but when you take some bad script that you say, okay, this is bad, you still do this comic with love, or it's, you know, more, I don't know,
Just a job, just work.
Just a job.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, there have been times that I've had certain scripts that I just didn't understand why they were doing it, in the way that they were doing it. And most of the time, it was just a matter of pushing through and finding out what I could like about the drawing as much as I could to work with it. Sometimes if I felt comfortable about it, I would talk to the writer or editor or whatnot about the situation if something particularly bothered me, if I didn't think something made sense or something like that. And then there are other times where I've taken the leap, where my son recently got advice from one of his coworkers that said, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yeah.
So in that same line, and it didn't always work, but you try stuff. But if I thought of a better way to do something, or a way that I understood better, that I thought worked, sometimes I would just spring that on the writer and the editor, saying, I know you had it like this, but I kind of saw it like this. What do you think? And in that same fashion, I always found that I had greater chances with all that. And it didn't always work, but I had greater chances if I drew it for them and I showed them what I meant, rather than just told them what I meant. If I just, maybe I couldn't have explained it right or whatever, but if I actually showed them the drawing of the scene done a little differently or something like that, sometimes it would work out better that way. Yeah, there've been a couple of jobs where then they'd be like, no, we need you to do it exactly the way it was in the script. And I grumble or whatever I do, but try to get through with it. But you never know where that's going to lead you either, because in that same line of thinking, then there was a great time that I got to work with Keith Giffen for, I don't know, 5-6 years, maybe even. We worked together on Larfleeze, Blue Beetle, Justice League 3001. I want to say there was something else. And a couple small things. But one of the great things of working with Keith was that he would plot it all out. He would usually send me actual thumbnails of the page. He would break it down into his grid panel pages or something like that. And he would explain basically what he wanted in the story with some simple captions or whatever going on. We might talk about it over the phone too. But in any of the jobs that I did with Keith, we had the understanding right from the beginning, because he saw that I had written my own stuff. He saw that I always had ideas when we talked about the books and whatnot. So he told me, it doesn't matter the page, it doesn't matter where you're going. If you've got an idea, I want you to put it in.
Nice.
He goes, obviously, if we're, talking at the beginning of the story, we have to start at the superhero over here in Gotham City, and at the end of the story, the superhero has to be in Metropolis. I'd still prefer we go for Metropolis by the end of it. But if the whole middle section or something else turns out where I just did this and we went through, I don't know, Fawcett City or something else, and I had a better idea to go through a different city, DC City or something, he said, go for it. Every time, go for it. In fact, for the first, when we were on, I don't think it was on Larfleeze, but when we were doing Blue Beetle, I thought there was getting more pressure on that book of oversight and different things, because it was all part of Rebirth. But at a different point with Keith, I was trying to show him again where he wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And I went, well, what if we did this A, B, and C instead? And after like the second or third attempt of trying to show him that stuff, he's just like, Scott, I don't want to see it. I want you just to do it. I want to see it when it's done. Because that's how Keith liked to work, was he literally, and with all the past people he's told me, a lot, his best working situations he enjoyed was the writer would give him something. He'd like this out of it. He'd throw away the rest, like his Legion time. And then he would put the parts in that he liked, and then he would add all sorts of other parts. And then the writers he would work with liked to work that way too, because then they'd be surprised with what he did. But it would be inspiring to work that way. He'd be like, oh, we're going to do that. Oh, you could do this too. Oh, that brings in these ideas.
Nice.
And you can always build with it. So, you never know when to like pull that trigger and really throw ideas out there. But I've always found for most of my career, the better it's gone and the stronger it's gone, it's been on the projects where I felt open enough with all of that to say ideas, show ideas, and all that kind of stuff. And again, besides Keith and some other people that were great, Jeff was also really that way when we worked on The Flash. We talked every issue. And Jeff was certainly the writer and the plotter and everything of the book. But he always wanted to know my input on everything we did, why we did it, why not to do it. Hey, what about this? Oh, we'll get to that in 2 issues later or sooner or whatever we do. He was always looking for input on creating those stories. And I really enjoyed all that. Plus, I learned a lot too. I learned a lot about writing comic books from him.
Yeah, and Keith is a really genius of the comic books too. You can see by his Justice League. He really, well, Jeff too. So that's really nice. That's really nice because there is a freedom, right? You can, okay, I think that you feel free for do your history. That's really nice. And okay, I have one last question and 3 questions that my followers sent to you. My last question is always the same, and it's, I don't know, some people say that is an easy question, and other people say it's an, I don't know, hard question. But what is your worst work?
My worst work. Well, it'd probably be one of my first jobs. Would always be one of my worst ones. I haven't looked at that Jaguar Annual job that I did at the beginning. I haven't looked at that in at least 10 years. And I'm sure it would make me cringe. There isn't an issue of The Flash that Jeff and I did that we both ultimately were not happy with. It just didn't, we were trying to do something and do something a little differently. And it just, I know it's Jeff's least favorite issue, and it's probably mine too. Right before we did Blitz with Zoom, we did a one-shot with the Top. But it was trying one of my takes on a side thing so that he was a crazy guy or whatever. Ultimately, my art didn't do it. We were running late on stuff, and then Jeff just didn't get a grasp on it. So I don't remember the issue number. But the cover is Flash falling as a tiny little figure on the cover. Other than that, trying to think of, again, it's one of those things of like whether it gels or not with the rest of the team going on. I also think there were some issues that I did of the Avengers that just they didn't click. They didn't work for me.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, that's nice.
I mean, Earth's Mightiest Heroes worked out great. I thought that miniseries that was called Earth's Mightiest Heroes, where we had every letter of the miniseries was a letter of Avengers was the cover. So the first one was A and all that stuff. So I think I have, just to make sure your viewers know what we're talking about. These.
Oh, nice.
So this was like year 1 of Avengers stuff. So that's really old. The original Iron Man, you know,
the original group, right?
Yeah, this is them as they were starting off with. And a lot of that turned out great. I had lots of fun on that stuff, drawing all that classic material and those old villains and everything. It was really lots of fun.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really enjoyed these arts. I didn't see it yet, so I hope that if you come to Brazil soon, I really hope that you bring a print because I love this.
Thank you.
Art, you know?
Do you not read any digital comic books?
No, I don't know. I like this feeling of the pages, you know. Sometimes I read, you know, some writers or artists send me some comics and I read, but to talk about it on my channel, but it's not my favorite thing, but I do sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go to the questions my followers sent to you. There is 3 questions. The first question is it's from Argel. Let me say the right name, okay?
Yeah.
And okay, all of these 2 guys sent you questions, but one guy sent you 2 great questions. So I will say 2 questions from him. And if you can, I don't know, send hi to them. If I'm not asking too much, okay? The first question is from Argel Alcântara. Argel. His name is Argel. And he said, I love your Flash. Which Flash villain was the most fun to draw? I really like a scene he made of Grodd throwing a car into a building because some kids threw a banana peels at him.
Yeah, that was in our first issue that we got to draw Gorilla Grodd. Thank you for the question, Arjo. Did I say that right?
That's great. That's great.
Grodd is my favorite Flash villain for all of them, which is why I drew him the other night. In fact, that issue we did, that first time we drew Grodd in our run of comic books, was started because Jeff asked me one of the things that what did I want to do while I was on Flash. As again, his being a team member, he had all sorts of ideas and plans. But I said I wanted to draw Grodd because I've always loved monsters. Hulk was my first comic book. When I was a kid, I loved watching King Kong, Godzilla, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula movies, vampire or werewolf movies. Didn't matter. I love monsters, which is why I think I also did really well on Solomon Grundy. But so we got that. We wanted to do the Grodd issue, but we were still both fairly new in the industry at that point. Neither one of us had become any bigger names or whatnot. So we had to get things approved through our editor. And at first our editor said, no, please don't do an issue of Grodd, because they had just done like a year or so previous, like a JLA Ape or something like that, I think it was called. Okay. So Wonder Woman was turned into a gorilla, Superman was turned into a gorilla, all of the silly stuff was done. So they thought it was just going to be all that silly stuff again. And we went, no, that's not our Grodd. We wanted Grodd to be, King Kong, a terrifying beast, all that stuff, just to, try and make kids cry or whatever we could do. And then, it was funny in that Jeff acknowledged that kind of attitude that people would have towards Grodd. He liked to put that in his writing. And I love that scene where the kids are throwing banana peels or bananas at Grodd out the window as he's going down the street. But then what was Grodd's response? It was so awesome. He picked up a car and whipped it through the building.
That's really nice. That's really nice. For who don't know this scene, it's appearing at the screen right now. And there is 2 questions from Von Deus. His name is Von Deus. I don't know how to pronounce it. Probably it's Von Deus. And he said, I would like, okay, this is a big question. So, okay, let's go. I would like to know from you how you see this new model of hiring publishers that does not allow artists to be identified with the characters. As in the past, there was Simonson's Thor, Miller's Daredevil, or Paris Titans. But today that is particularly over. You are an artist is very connected to Flash for a work of years ago. But who is the face of Flash today? Who is the face of Thor today? How do you see this loss of identification between the artists and the characters nowadays? Yes.
That's a great question, Vom Dios.
Yeah, perfect.
Complicated question. And I'm sure there's a different perspective, I think, that would come from younger artists today. They may not see it like I do. I'm agreeing with Vom Deus. I think it's a mistake that the companies generally make these days. I think it's a little bit more on the choice of Marvel these days that they do this than DC. Because I mean, I still had a run on Blue Beetle that was 18 issues. I've known of other artists at DC that have had, year, 2 years run on Aquaman or various books going on. It's still a matter of whoever's on the book has to prove themselves. They have to sell enough for the company to want to keep them there. Oh, and there was just the guy on, wasn't he South American too, that was on Hulk? I can't remember his name right now. On Immortal Hulk?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he did have a fair amount of fill-ins, but he lasted, most of those 50 issues or whatever that they ran. So it does happen, but the artist has to make the impression to really make that connection so the companies want to do it. But I think it's also connected to the idea that the way that I read comic books, and I think Von Dios did too, was like those George Perez Titans or the John Byrne X-Men's or Fantastic Fours or Alpha Flights. You'd wind up reading it for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. And during that time, the creators that were on that book could really make something special. Between the teamwork of the creators themselves, but also the type of stories that they would tell could get richer and stronger the longer they were on the book. When Marv Wolfman and George Perez started on Titans, the stories were good from the beginning, but they got really good by the end. They were doing amazing stories. The Who is Donna Troy? The stories where Dick Grayson gave up being Robin and became Nightwing. That whole Terra saga, the Judas Contract, all that stuff. They couldn't have, I don't think they could have dreamt those stories of doing it when they started on Titans, but for the fact that they were on there for that length of time, the strength of those creators was able to shine through more and more. Similar in some way, maybe, hopefully, Jeff and I had done that for The Flash. We were on there for about 3 years. And yeah, one of our best stories was Blitz. And that was towards the end. That was the end of the time that I was on there with him. And by that time, he and I had understood each other so well on doing all of these things that even if he didn't finish a thought in the script, I knew what he wanted. So we were able to build it pretty much exactly the way we wanted to, even though it's basically our first try. You know, he would do the script and he'd get it through once or twice. But then, you know, if you're starting with something brand new, you're going to get things wrong. You're not going to do it the best way. And then you send it to an artist. I know when I started on Flash, for me, it felt like, besides Flash running and that kind of stuff, to get Wally West right, took me a good 3-4 issues before I went like, that's him. That's my Wally. Now I know which Wally I'm drawing. I know exactly the guy. And you can only get that over time. And that is something that isn't being held in that high regard in these days as a business model for the companies. They want you to show you, you know, the best that you've got in 3 issues, 6 issues, whatever little bit of time that they give you. And beyond that, it affects our careers as creators of writers, and we all have to jump around more often now and find different jobs and this thing. Beyond that, I still think ultimately it's hurting the brand name for DC comic books or Marvel comic books or anybody who's deciding to do this stuff where they are changing their creators so often. Yes, it's very nice for the creators that now I get all this acclaim all this time for Flash, sure. So there's a bit of give and take that we both get to share off of that time that we spent together. But I really think that Flash, you know, in our case, or you know, a Spider-Man case with like a John Romita Jr. It's great that John Romita Jr. is doing Spider-Man again. I think that those characters, the Marvel characters, DC characters, whoever, I think they also really benefit from those long associations of those things, because when you're just doing 6 issues at a time or 3 issues at a time or whatever short amount of time you get, it's really hard to build that connection with a fan that's going to last for a long time. If you get 3 issues and you really love them, but then you don't like the next 3 issues because it's different people or a different type of story, well, then you've got a fan that's going to come and go and it's not going to hang around so long. One of the things that I was told at the beginning of our Flash run, or during the time of our Flash run, was that one of the editors that was in charge and had to approve me for being on the book. Initially, our Flash sales were not great. They were not good at all. But they had real faith in the book. They really liked the new take, and they really liked Jeff as a writer, and they figured to give him a little extra time or give me extra time for us to grow on that book. And we did. But part of the math, part of the business that was involved was that it was explained to me that they had faith in what we were doing. So what we were working on was a slow buildup to better sales. And if you slow build up to better sales, then when you do hit your peak, and everybody hits a peak at some point, then it has to go down. It will go down slowly. Those fans who liked it for a long time are not going to give it up tomorrow, right? But if you walk in tomorrow and you like the book, they said it's a proven fact for them in their business models or whatever they were working on, that if you liked it, you know, this month and next month, but then you hated it the next month, you drop off right away. So for them, it's also a really smart way to think about the business, was that if you do this gradual thing with creators on a book for a long time, if it's working and everything's going right and everyone has a belief in it, that you'll have that sales, which ultimately means you'll have a long time of decent sales going on versus up and down and up and down. And something sells great because, you know, you've got Barry Windsor Smith doing an issue, but then the next issue he's not, and then the sales go down.
Perfect.
So it's that business model that they're shooting for these days. And yeah, I don't agree with it. I don't think it's the right choice to make, but it's their choice to make.
This is a great question. It's a great answer too. So I love to hear, you know, I'm pretty jealous because his question is better than all of mine. So that's okay. We have more 6 minutes that Zoom will kick us, but it's just one more question, I guess. It gives time.
I'll try and make my answer shorter.
Okay, that's perfect. Von Deus asked too, do you think digital comics are eliminating the need for inkers? And because of that, we're being deprived of seeing iconic partnerships like Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, or John Byrne and Terry Olsen, that people identified clearly, and it gave an improvement to the art. Is this doomed to disappear? Who would be the best inker for your art? It's a lot of questions.
That's a lot of questions. Thanks, Van Deus. Those great questions. I don't think digital is necessarily getting rid of the inker. Yes, that is kind of inherent in somebody who's doing digital books these days, that by the time they've done sketching it, that it's basically an inked, finished piece of art, or whatever they want to do, a finished page. But I think there are still a few guys out there, even that work digitally, that they're only penciling. And then they send off blue lines to inkers and stuff like that. So it can still happen. I think it's more just the fact that the kids that are trained these days to come and make comic books are trained to be this complete artist in and of themselves. And most of the time, I think that's fine. I don't think that's a bad thing. I do it myself, where I'm doing most of that black and white artwork, if not the color artwork, plenty enough times all by myself. But he is correct too. There is a magic that you can get when you get, you know, a few more artists working in on it, and you get that collaboration like I was talking about with Keith, and that was just the writing and drawing, penciling of it. You know, for years I looked for my Terry Austin, for my Klaus Janson, for somebody to work with on a regular basis. I was lucky enough to get Klaus Janson to ink me once.
Yeah,
I was very happy about that. But I think that there is magic that can come from that. And to be fair, I was lucky. I was really lucky during my Flash time that I had Doug Hazelwood inking me during that time. I think him and the colorist and the letterers we had, all of us together, it takes that whole village to raise that child that is a comic book. Yeah, some people can do it mostly on their own. I've tried to do it mostly on their own. But it's also can be very fun when you have the different creators that work together on it, and they each bring their own piece of the magic to the puzzle, so that ultimately you get that different flower than what would have happened if it was just one of you or two of you or something like that. There is a magic to inkers, and I wish that they would stick around, because I know of other inkers and real inkers that are out there that know the business and know how to do this inking part of the job, which includes drawing. It includes knowing all of these end results of what you need out of a comic book page, including storytelling. Real inkers know all that stuff, and they're just as vital as any other piece of it. So hopefully in some form, fashion, or another, minority of the groups or not, they'll last. I hope that they will.
That's perfect. Oh my God. So you answered shortly. So that's great. Mr. Collins, thank you so much. This interview was very great to me. I really enjoyed to talk with you. For people who don't know you, where they can find you, your social media?
Facebook, I think I'm Scott Kolins #5 /5, whatever it is. You'll find me. You'll see this picture. And I post all the time on there, Flash drawings or whatever else I'm doing on, or the current jobs that I'm working on. But I've got it all on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter as well. I think we've met through Instagram. Yeah, so yeah, you can find me.
I was thinking, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think you can find me on any one of those. Pretty easy to find.
Okay, that's perfect. So guys, his social medias is on description for who want to know him, and I hope that you enjoy it. And Von Deus and Argel who had your questions answered. So nice. That's really nice. Thank you so much,
Great.
Mr. Collins. Thank you so much to all of you that watch it, and see you all. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Caillou.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collins.